Hey everybody, this is Amy Wells, Titans Amy from the Tennessee Titans.
This is Nate Bain, Titans social media manager.
Hey everybody, it's Brett Bryan, game day host of Titans Radio, and you're listening to the Titans of the Southwest podcast with Lito and Big Mo.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Titans of the Southwest podcast. We're here with a very special guest, someone semi-new to the Titans community, at least new for this season. We have with us ESPN's Turron Davenport. Turron, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I appreciate you guys for reaching out and having me on.
Definitely. Well, we're both glad to have you here. We're not going to go too much into detail on what you've already discussed on the other podcast, man. We just want to get down to the brass tacks of things. So if you're ready, Lito, you ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll, man. I'm interested in picking his brain.
Okay, well, so far, I mean, what you've given the Titans community is great insight, detailed breakdowns with an emphasis on clarifying the little things that might get overlooked. You provide an interesting perspective, having been a former player, and you're blunt and very direct. You're not the sugarcoat type of person, which some of that might have been built during your time in a hectic fan base such as Philadelphia, man. What would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's just me, man. I like to shoot straight, as you say, you call a spade, and I mean, that's just the way I do it. I don't like the sugarcoat. I don't think there's time for, the nonsense, and I think the fan base actually deserves someone that's going to call it the way they see it, be objective, and that's what I aim to do for this fan base. And I mean, I've dealt with passionate fan bases, whether it be Philly, Baltimore when I was covering the Ravens, and even San Francisco was an interesting fan base also. So it's prepared me, and I'm ready to go, man.
Cool. Well, I wanted to talk to you about the Titans-Steelers preseason game. Now, what in your mind was your biggest takeaway from that game?
There were a few things. I think the lack of physicality up front is something that definitely, and I say on offense, the lack of physicality there is something that definitely is something that really has to be touched on. I think that's something that Coach Vrabel is going to be looking to make sure it doesn't happen again. But like you said, the Steelers are a team that's known for that, and when you're going against somebody like that, you have to bring your A game, regardless whether it's preseason or not. That's something that was, it stood out. But I think the biggest thing is just the offense, the way they staggered, and how they were not able to establish a running game. And everybody looks at this Matt LaFleur offense and they say, hey, it's a passing offense, which it is, but a lot of it is based off of the ability to find that balance, the ability to run the football. And you have to be able to do that. So that way, when you have your play action, guys rushing the passer, they're not going to just completely bypass the running back and go to the quarterback, and that's what was happening in Pittsburgh. So you need to establish that running game so you can work off of it with the play action and also just to get your offense in a rhythm. So I saw a lack of physicality. I saw a lack of tempo and rhythm from them as well.
I'm glad you said that because that's kind of what I was focusing on, and that's what actually stood out to me. More specifically, Josh Klein being abused over and over again on the interior. The Titans, they signed Klein to a 4-year deal, $26 million, $12 million guaranteed, which was a good deal for somebody who was picked up off waivers at one point. But his performance, and it's still preseason, but still, you have to have that level of physicality. Part of me thinks that the Titans going out and signing Pamphile and Su'a-Filo, they had hopes that either one of them or both of them would kind of develop better and maybe push him for that spot or push Quentin Spain on the opposite side. In your opinion, do you think the Titans' deal with Klein solidifies his spot as a starter? Do you think him being pulled in favor of Pamphile was more Coach Keith Carter being upset with his play? Or maybe kind of to gauge if Pamphile would be a better fit for that spot? What's your takeaway from that?
I think that was them trying to get Pamphile in there. But if you notice, one of the sacks were actually given up by Pamphile because he never, they ran a stunt. And as offensive lineman, when you see a stunt like that, you're supposed to come back, you bump hips, and then you spread back out. And he never spread back out. And the interior guy was able to loop outside and get to Mariota and sack him. So my thing is this. I know Klein didn't have the best game on against the Steelers, but he has been a solid player for them. So I'm not going to be so quick to give him the hook and say that, the deal was the wrong thing to do or anything like that. I think he's still a starter. And I've seen him in practice do some really good things, whether it be get out on a tight end screen, or even a running back screen. I've seen him do good things there. I think his style of play fits that need for a guy who could, get out in space and make those blocks and those type of zone running schemes that they use. So I think he is firmly entrenched as a starter. Panfield is a solid backup, and like you said, they brought in Suafilo. And the thing that you have to look at is too much competition is never a bad thing. Like, you could never have too much competition. You want it at every position, even quarterback. So I don't think anything was done wrong. I think they did a good job of bringing these guys in to push Klein, but I think Klein's still the starter.
That's fair. Speaking of the competition, let's talk a little bit about the wide receivers. More importantly, in your projected 53-man roster, you gave Deontay Burnett the edge over Darius Jennings. Is there any specific reason for that, or has he shown more in practice than in the games, or what's your reasoning for that?
Well, it depends on the way you look at it. I think Burnett has been a more consistent player, especially in practice, whereas he's someone that is always where you need him to be. He's someone that consistently catches the football, and he does his job over and over again. And I think that's something that a coach like Mike Vrabel really appreciates, right? And then you also look at his ability to double as a punt returner. Obviously, Darius Jennings has been impressive returning kicks for this team, but at the same time, you have other guys that are going to do that, whether that be, Dory Jackson, whether it be Deion Lewis. There are other guys, Nick Williams when he comes back. And I mentioned Nick Williams because you have to look at the slot position. Mm-hmm. Nick Williams is probably their best slot guy, and it depends on what type of slot you want. If you want a bigger physical type of slot that you'll see, which is interesting because you'll see teams like the Falcons where they use Julio Jones as a slot, and that's to get that bigger physical guy. But I think in that case, if they want that type of player, I think they could put, a Matthews in there at the slot. They have options that they could do, but when I look at Burnett, I think he gives them that versatility, whereas he could be depth at slot, he could be depth at X, he could be depth at Z. And I think he brings more to the table. But I know Mike Vrabel places a strong emphasis on special teams, and he's mentioned Darius Jennings multiple times as far as being a gunner on punt team, as far as being the L1 or R1 on kickoff and returning kicks. So it's going to be interesting. But me personally, I did it based on what I would do, not what I think the coaches would. Well, a combination of what I think the coaches would do and what I would do, and that's why Burnett is there.
Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback off of that, Jennings does have a few seasons under his belt, so maybe the Titans will look at Deontay Burnett like, well, Darius Jennings does have more seasons under his belt, but where would Burnett be with more seasons under his belt? I kind of think they're going to be looking at it through those lenses, if that makes sense. Like maybe
that's definitely something that you could look at, and I think Burnett. And I know in talking to John Robinson a few times, I know that he really likes Burnett. Actually, one of the first conversations I had with John Robinson, I told him, I said, man, you did a great job getting a player of this caliber as an undrafted free agent. Mm-hmm. And if you go back and you watch some of his games, man, Burnett was highly productive. He's a very polished receiver, which you see a lot of these guys out of USC come in and they know how to run routes. They know how to play that receiver position, whether it's Marquise Lee, Nelson Aguilar, a guy who I got to cover the last couple of years in Philadelphia, Robert Woods. There's a lot of receivers that come out of USC that are just polished players, and that's what you're getting out of Deontay Burnett.
Yeah, even to touch on that, we used to have Damian Williams, who we got from USC years back, and he was actually pretty sharp too. Was always where he needed to be. He was never really out of position, so you're definitely hit the nail on the head with that. To kind of touch on what you mentioned about Williams, you mentioned the slot position, but you also referenced Julio Jones, being rotated in there in Atlanta's offense. In a piece that you wrote recently about Davis kind of developing into a true number one receiver, you also mentioned that he is learning all the different spots across the receiver line. How is that progression going, and how is that related to him developing a rapport with Mariota?
Yeah, for sure. They are moving him across the formation a lot, and you'll see a lot of times they'll, run trips, and they'll have him as the number 3 receiver, closest to the tackle, or they'll use him as number 2, and a lot of times out of those situations, they have him run that skinny post or that what you call a bang 8, And it's a pure timing throw. And I saw them connect a few times, especially in the inter-squad joint practices that they had with the Bucks. They were able to connect there. The timing, I think, is coming along, to be honest with you, whereas Mariota could throw to a spot trusting that Corey Davis will be there. And you've seen that on some of the deep over routes that they have also, where Corey Davis runs that deep over route from, whether it be left to right, right to left, what have you. And they work it out of play action because that's a longer developing route, and you want to give them time to clear the safety. And that's another area where they've been able to connect. However, obviously the disconnect, the big one was in the Steelers game. And those are things that are going to come with time. And as you get more reps with a receiver or tight end for that matter, when you have those off-schedule type of plays like that situation, it's going to be a completion. It's going to be a big play, but it's just a matter of being able to read each other's body language, to see the same thing and react the same way, and that's just something that takes time. It's just like when you meet a young lady, right, and initially you're not able to finish her sentences when she starts a sentence, but once you guys spend more time together, you know what I mean? And you get that synergy going. She can start something, you'll finish it, and that's just the same type of relationship, quarterback to receiver.
I'm sorry. That is perhaps like the best analogy I've heard for that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like I have to jump in here. That is awesome. And that just kind of plays into like you are a common era former player who is now turned reporter. And that's just the kind of thing that like helps us associate between the two. And so I just like I have to know, as being a common era player turned reporter, how do you see Vrabel as a common era player turned coach? Do you see like big differences? Is that somebody that you would want as your coach?
For sure. I would love to have him as my coach. And, I played in college. I didn't play professionally. So I don't want anybody to get the misconception that I played in the NFL. I did not. I got some looks from Canada and, a couple arena looks, but I was not a professional football player. So there's a bit of a difference. But when you look at Mike Vrabel, and the reason why I say I would love him to be my head coach is because his ability to relate to players. And he knows that there's different buttons to push for different guys. And then in addition to that, the way he's so involved. And that's something that I've really been impressed about with this whole coaching staff. Whereas these guys will dig in and get dirty with these guys. You see Coach Kerry Coombs, running routes as a receiver against these DBs. You see him during special teams time. He pulls Adoree Jackson and Malcolm Butler and Logan Ryan aside, and you see them working on different subtle tricks at the catch point on those contested catches, right? You see linebacker coach. You see him, a former Patriot, a teammate of Mike Vrabel. You see him, allowing these guys to literally tackle him into a padded bag. You see Mike Vrabel putting the armor on, a pad on his chest, and letting these guys literally get their hands on them. You see Coach Pat O'Hara. I mean, for heaven's sake, Pat O'Hara before practice was throwing, and Pat O'Hara's a QB coach. See him throwing to Rashard Matthews running routes as Matthews tries to work his way back onto the football field. These are all things that I really, as a player, really liked about some of the coaches that I had, because it shows more interest. It shows more willingness to get involved with what it is that you're trying to teach me. And guys learn things differently. Some guys need to have that type of interaction to really learn. Like, I got to be able to put my hands on coach to be able to know how to, grab them and turn them. Or, I need to be able to put my hands, like to actually literally slap coach's hand off of me as we're simulating going up for a contested catch. And these are things that, change from player to player. So I think it's really good that he's able to do that. And that's just his ability just to feel, right? He has a good gauge as a former player. He knows when, all right, we gotta pipe things down for a second. Guys, bring it in. This is what I need. And that's something that, just his ability also just to go from station to station. One practice, I watched him work with Taylor Lewan. I watched him work with Jayon Brown and the linebackers. And then he had the nerve to go over with the DBs, and he was working with them. And then on top of that, you see him working with the running backs at making moves at the top of their routes coming out of the backfield. That's 5 different positions in one practice this man worked with. So that's respectable.
In all your years of covering the NFL professionally, is this the first time you've ever seen a coaching staff this hands-on, or is it comparable to any other coaching staff you've covered?
That's the thing. I've been blessed with covering some really awesome coaching staffs. Starting from Jim Harbaugh and Ed Donatel with Tom Sula and all of those guys in San Francisco, going to John Harbaugh, but with his coaching staff. I think that the staff that will compare most to this staff that I've seen here in Tennessee is the Eagles staff, because they were also hands-on. And you had Doug Peterson, a former player, and there's something that they call emotional intelligence, and those guys will literally go to war for him. I remember after the Bengals game in 2016, they got blown out. It showed piss poor effort, and people began to question whether or not Doug Peterson, was losing the locker room or anything like that. And the guys spoke up on his behalf. After the game, they spoke up on his behalf that whole week, and I remember they went out. I believe it was the Giants. They went out and beat the Giants. So, this is something that I'm seeing here in Tennessee, where guys are really able to attach themselves to the coach. And anybody who tells you that a player, that really likes the coach doesn't play for the coach is lying. I mean, you're always going to give maximum effort, but typically when you give maximum effort, that's for you, right? Because your name is on the back of the jersey and you're representing yourself. But in a lot of cases, when you got a coach that is so invested in you, like a guy like Mike Vrabel is, you're going to play for him too. When you have a coach that comes to you and asks you about your children, ask you about your family, ask you about, your personal life, whereas you have those conversations just the same as you have football conversations. That's an emotional deposit, and that comes from a coach who has what Doug Peterson and Jeffrey Lurie in Philadelphia will refer to as emotional intelligence, because he knows if I put those emotional deposits, if I make them, I'm going to get a payback.
Yeah. That's interesting. And this will be probably one of my last ones, and I'll let you guys kind of wrap up. I'm kind of curious, because you've covered such great organizations in the past, and now you're with Tennessee. I'm not asking you to rate or anything by any means, but are there big differences you see? Because we as fans always feel Rodney Dangerfield syndrome of just no respect. We get no respect at all. And so I'm just kind of curious, do you see that? Do you see any other kind of differences going from these big market teams to a smaller market team, but still just a really passionate fan base as an organization as a whole? What are your takeaways?
Yeah, I think the no respect thing is absolutely well placed with this team. And I'm going to say this, when you look at the best D tackles, right, Jarrell Casey isn't someone that's mentioned, but I'm going to tell you what, he needs to be. And I actually have a post that went up this morning about that. Kevin Byard, I'll put him against any safety in the league. When it comes to a well-rounded player, I'll put him against anybody, because he plays the run just as well as he plays the pass. He's always in position. I talked to him the other day about it. I asked him, I said, hey, where'd you get this built-in GPS that you have? And he started laughing, and I said, because you track the football like you have a GPS. You're always around it. And, we got to talk about that. And that's something that, you got Deion Sanders, calling Kevin Byard a fan on Twitter.
Yeah.
The guy's only an all-pro. He only led the league in interceptions. So how is it that a national commentator or analyst doesn't know who Kevin Byard is? The no respect thing is definitely there. I think the Titans just overall, along with, Jacksonville and the Texans, and, there's select fan bases that don't get the credit that they deserve, and it's just not as big of a market. But once you get here and you immerse yourself in this market, you see wow, there is love for this team. Now, granted, it's a little bit different than Philly. You look at Philly's first open practice, you have 40,000 people at Lincoln Financial Field for their open practice. At Nissan Stadium, their first open practice, there were 7,000. But you know what? It's still it's a different scale. But I definitely think the respect thing. Yeah, the love is there, man. I can feel passion from fans that I've interacted with, and it's awesome, man. And it's just unfortunate. I don't think the team gets enough exposure, and that's why, I plan to give them as much exposure as I can. And, it's going to be bad exposure. There's going to be bad games sometimes. Part of being objective, you're going to talk about that. But I also want to bring the positive. I want to talk about some of the things these guys are doing, like Jarrell Casey, with the Starlight Foundation. He has his own hospital gown that he had designed for kids. You tie it on the side instead of in the back, and it has nice designs on it. It's just a fun thing. Obviously, a kid in the hospital, it's not a fun situation, but any type of thing that can add to just kind of make you a little more upbeat is a good thing. And, to see a guy like Casey do that is awesome, and there's plenty of stories of guys that have done, some great things. You look at Derrick Henry and what he, the other day, taking the sprees and actually teaching them how to budget their money with the gift cards that he gave them. So there's great things that go on, and I think that needs to be highlighted as well.
Definitely, and I think we appreciate you bringing a lot of this stuff to light. Your piece on Jarrell Casey really highlighted him as a person and as a player. You mentioned his willingness to sacrifice kind of his own production or his own stats that would get him more national recognition to eat up extra blockers so other people could shine. I think that goes overlooked a lot in terms of Casey, so I really enjoyed your piece that you did on him.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
To wrap it up, I just have one more two-parter, part 1 and part 2 question, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Mariota, on his recent press conference, he was asked if he's mastered the offense. In your opinion, do you think that was a fair question, or would it have been more suited for mid-season? I know somebody touched on how comfortable he felt with the offense, which I thought was more appropriate, but what did people expect him to say to that? I didn't get that at all.
I'm not exactly sure that's the best question that could have been asked on a couple levels. And I think this is, no offense to the person who asked the question. I think this is a result of not understanding the process, right? And when you look at this offense, it is actually an offense that's very difficult for a quarterback. And it requires just almost a complete breakdown and restructure. And when you're asking a guy to shift his mechanics, from the ground up, and ask him to learn an offense, you're going to have initial struggles. Mm-hmm. And you're not going to master an offense anyway, but when you're working on all those things at the same time, it's not going to happen. I think a better question would be, as you mentioned, what is your comfort level with the offense? Because I know when I talked to Dan Orlovsky, former Lions quarterback, Rams quarterback, Texans quarterback, but he was in this offense with Coach LaFleur when they were in L.A. with the Rams, and we were talking, and he said that this is an offense that you're going to, you make reads and you make a throw that you think is the right throw and it's a completion, but here that's not what they want you to do. They want you to take a different shot, and it's all based off of just kind of how your progressions are supposed to go. So your head could be spinning. You could be in a situation where you really don't know where to go, and that's something that's going to happen. But for me, and I think it was that same press conference, what I asked Mariota about was, using his ability to the maximum, and that's he could extend plays. And I asked him about being aggressive, being on the same page with the receivers and taking more shots, because frankly, that pass to Corey Davis, that first one, should have been a touchdown. Because if you go back and look at the play, the safety was on the opposite hash. Now, I don't care what the play in the huddle is called. If you're right there in that situation, the safety's on the opposite hash, and your receiver turns his route upfield, just throw it. Because as a receiver, when you see that safety on the opposite hash and you turn your route upfield and you don't see anybody else up top, all you're thinking about is, all right, I got to make sure I don't bump my head on the goalpost after I score. That's really what you're thinking. And that's something that, Mariota was in a little more of a conservative mindset and didn't take that shot. And that's why he had that disconnect. And that's why the 2 days after that, we had a conversation with Mike Vrabel, and I asked him about, off schedule throws and making those creating those unscripted plays. And that's an example. And that's why he said, hey, look, let it rip. It's okay. If you throw an interception, you throw an interception, but let it go. Throw the ball. I want him to throw the ball down the field. So I think that's more what you want to focus on. Granted, yeah, you want to master the offense, but at the same time, other teams, they know what's coming. But if you could find success in those hidden plays, those unscripted ones, that's how you really get an offense that can't be stopped. And that's what the Eagles had last year. They had that ability where Carson could just, things break down, he's going to move within the pocket. If he gets flushed out, that's no problem. He's going to run with his eyes down the field. And lo and behold, you have Nelson Aguilar or Nick Foles going to Alshon Jeffrey in the Vikings game. He moved within the pocket. Alshon turned it up. Deep shot. Next thing you know, it's a 42-yard touchdown. So those are the plays that I think really need to be more focused on right now. It's crazy to ask a guy how he could master an offense at this point right now, especially in a situation that Mariota's in.
And I think that's like the perfect segue to part B of my question for you, Turron. I think it would be an easier approach to mastering the offense if you had Delaney Walker and Rashard Matthews on the field at full health. I think that would help his progression in mastering the offense. But that's for another conversation, man.
That would help. That would definitely help because they are his most reliable targets, and he knows their body language.
Yes, and he touched on that in that press too, is getting familiar with Davis's body language. I guess my last question for you is, and we touched on it earlier in the interview, what in your mind can help speed up or expedite the rapport or the rapport being built between Davis and Mariota outside of reps? Is there something more that the two could be doing to build chemistry outside of what they are already doing, or is it just going to take time?
It's going to take time, but one thing that I haven't heard Davis mention and I haven't heard Mariota mention is film study together. Mariota touched on it where he said, we have to have conversations and know, okay, in this situation, this is what I want you to do and this is what you're going to do. But I think they need to have more of that, and I think they need to have that in film study. And that's one of the things. 'Cause I did a whole piece on this around this time last year on the Eagles, and it was really focusing on Carson Wentz getting on the same page with Zach Ertz, with Aguilar, Alshon Jeffrey, and at the time, Jordan Matthews. And I spent a lot of time talking to these guys about, the ways they were able to get on the same page. And a lot of it was just spending time together. And it didn't even have to be, watching film. It was just spending time getting to know each other, and then you kind of get a feel for how somebody's going to react in a situation. And that's something that I have. Now, these guys are young. Mariota's young. Corey Davis, second year in the league. Now, granted, I know last year it was Carson Wentz's second year in the league, but a lot of the other guys were veterans in the league, so they knew, how to relate to their quarterback. And I think that's something that Mariota and Corey Davis have to do, spend more time together in the film room and just bonding, period. And then it goes back to what I said about the young lady. You have a young lady, you know her better, so you know how she's going to react in a given situation. And that's just the same if your quarterback knows your receiver better or vice versa. They know how you're going to react in a given situation. And that's why Mariota is so comfortable with Matthews and with Delaney Walker at the moment, because they know each other and they can read each other's body language. They can speak to each other without actually saying words, and that means a lot.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Well, Mr. Davenport, I really want to thank you for coming on. And guys, if you're not following him on Twitter, on anything else, I mean, he writes for ESPN, great follow. I turned my notifications on for any tweet that he sends in the first preseason game, and I haven't turned it off since, and I don't regret it for a second. He is absolutely amazing. Gives you straight shooter. Follow him on Twitter at @Davenport_NFL. Just again, thank you so much, Mr. Davenport. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Definitely my pleasure as well. I appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot.
No problem. You take care of yourself, and we'll wrap it up here. But outside of that, maybe a little bit of tighten up. Are you feeling a little tighten up?
Well, hey, listen, man, I'm objective, so, win, lose, or draw, I got a job to do, but it's always easier when they win, so.
Hey, all right. I can respect that to the umpth degree. No, I definitely respect that. You got a job to do, you do it great, and we enjoy following you. Thank you very much, sir.
All right, I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Appreciate it.
All right, take care.